So I'm going to get this started. Other people will come in over time. So this is the Climate Action Working Group, Marine Conservation League. Hi, folks. And we're going to have an agenda that's going to be dealing with recent legislation at the federal level, the Inflation Reduction Act, and at the state level, the bills that Governor Newsom signed. And we'll also have an update on the green building ordinances. And then after that, there should be some time for organizations to give their reports. And the first item that we have is a discussion of or a presentation on the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a big deal, and that's why we're having a session on it here. That's going to run from 9:05 to 10. The segment on the bills that Governor Newsom signed that are climate related will be 10 to 10:30, and then the building ordinance will be from 10:30 to 10:45. First up will be Bill Cole and Jim Burrows, who will run through the Inflation Reduction Act. And Bill was former director of research and public policy for the University of California system. And Jim is a retired environmental lawyer who had worked for the California Coastal Commission, and initially. And so what we're going to do then is turn things over to Bill and to Jim, and Ken, you're the one that's controlling the slides, and here we go.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. So this is Jim, and just a minor point, I didn't actually work for the Coastal Commission. I was an ex officio member of the Coastal Commission and other things, but putting that aside, what we want to talk about today is the Inflation Reduction Act. Go ahead, Ken, next. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Biden last August, about 2 months ago. And the title of the Inflation Reduction Act is somewhat of a misnomer in the sense that while it does have some inflation reduction value over the long term, its real transformative value really is in its climate control actions that it authorizes. The big takeaway is that by 2030, it is estimated to result in approximately 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below the 2005 levels, or what is about 1 billion fewer metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, which is huge. It's been called the strongest climate legislation in history by the League of Conservation Voters. The League of Conservation Voters have been following environmental legislation ever since the 1970s. From industry perspective, the IRA, according to Bank Credit Suisse anyway, definitely changes the narrative from risk management to opportunity capture. But really, to understand the IRA is a bit like drinking out of a fire hose. But I think Bill and I can hit the headlines here in this presentation. So go ahead, next, Ken. A major objective of the IRA is to financially incentivize the installation of energy efficient improvements in the home, including in multi-unit developments. This would be heat pumps, electrical panel upgrades, electric stove oven upgrades, energy star weatherization improvements, and so on. The IRA incentivizes these improvements in two ways, with rebates and with tax credits. Now, as you know, a rebate is a government-funded cash payment back to the consumer who is installing these particular kind of qualified improvements. And of course, the tax credit is a reduction in one's tax liability for a given year, assuming that person or that homeowner has tax liability. The IRA authorizes two kind of rebate programs known as the HERO program and the HOMES program. And I'll just say that depending on your income, the homeowner is potentially eligible for a cash rebate of up to $14,000 for installation of energy efficiency improvements. Now, it's important to understand, and this applies to the grants that Bill is going to be talking about as well, is that rebates and grants authorized by the IRA are probably not going to become available to the consumer and to the users of the grants until sometime at the end of next year, the end of 2023. And that's because it's going to take the Department of Energy probably until next spring to move these billions of dollars out to the states for these rebate programs and these grant programs, probably until next spring. And then it may take, another 6 months, at least in the case of California anyway, for the state to take this money and be in a position to authorize the actual grant or the rebate to individuals who qualify. So just again, by way of example, this could be for a low-income homeowner, maybe up to an $8,000 cash rebate for installation of a heat pump. So next slide. Now, rebates are generally speaking for households with no or zero or very limited tax liability. For households with tax liability, the IRA authorizes tax credits that can be used for the installation of energy efficiency improvements. It's a 30% tax credit capped at $2,000 for installation of a heat pump, $1,200 and $1,200 for other energy efficiency improvements. For example, converting your gas stove to an electric induction stove and that kind of thing. The credits start in January of 2023, unlike rebates, which won't be available for about another year. The credits start in January 2023 and extend through for 10 years through 2032. And importantly, these credits can be claimed on a per year basis. That means that every year for the next 10 years that a homeowner decides to install a energy efficiency improvement, they potentially qualify for a tax rebate. So in an extreme example, that I don't know that anybody would ever do this, but a homeowner could, for example, install a couple of energy efficient windows every year for the next 10 years, and essentially recoup all of that cost through the tax credit of up to $1,200 per year for the installation of those kinds of things. Next, please. So what I've been talking about so far are energy efficiency improvements in the home. The IRA also authorizes renewable power generation improvements to the home, the installation of solar panels on the roof, for example, battery storage installations, pretty much any renewable power source on the property. Even if you wanted or could put in a windmill, for example, on your property. And it's a 30% tax credit. So just to kind of make this real, if it costs you $19,000 to install rooftop solar panels, that's going to generate in that particular year of installation a $5,700 tax credit to the homeowner. Now, what's important to understand about this 30% tax credit is that there's no dollar cap limit. So, for example, if it costs you $20,000 to install rooftop solar panels, you can get a $6,000 credit. But if it costs you $100,000 to install the rooftop solar panels and whatnot, you still get 30% of the $100,000 as a tax credit, $30,000 in that case. So there's no dollar cap on the renewable power home improvements that you can make on your home in order to qualify for the 30% tax credit. This tax credit is retroactive to 2022. Any solar panels, for example, that were installed in 22 qualify for the tax credit. The 30% tax credit sunsets 10 years from now in 2032, and it expires fully in 2035 at a 22% tax credit. Next. Now, what we've been talking about, again, is energy improvements in the home or installation of renewable energy features to the home, such as solar panels. There are also tax credits in the IRA for builders of new dwelling units, be it a single-family home or a multi-unit development. It's up to $2,500 tax credit if the new installation meets Energy Star certification requirements, up to a $5,000 tax credit if it meets Zero Energy Ready Homes certification. And as I say, this is available to multi-unit developers on a per unit basis. In order to get the maximum tax credit for this kind of work, and in other portions of the IRA as well, in order to get the maximum tax credit, the development has to comply with prevailing wage requirements. And let me just pause on the prevailing wage requirement as an example. There is much in this IRA, there's tons in this IRA that still needs to be fleshed out by guidance and rules and regulations to be issued mainly by IRS and the Treasury Department. And so much of what we're talking about here today is what is intended by the IRA and what's been authorized, but for the actual implementation, that is still in the process of being the very active and current process of being fleshed out by mostly by the Department of Treasury and by the Department of Energy in order to make this, in order to implement the objectives of the IRA. So next, we're talking about the home. The IRA also incentivizes energy improvements to what I'm calling the office. For existing commercial buildings, it incentivizes energy efficiency improvements in the form of a tax deduction, not a tax credit, but a tax deduction for the commercial building, up to $5 per square foot of tax deductions if the improvements result in a 50% reduction of energy, $2.50 per square foot if the improvements result in a reduction of 25% in energy efficiency. Next, that's the home. Now we're going to turn to vehicles, what is becoming a relatively well-known feature of the IRA. What the IRA does is to create a $7,500 tax credit, not create, but continue it in some ways, a $7,500 tax credit for the purchase of new EVs, and a $4,000 tax credit for the purchase of used EVs, electric vehicles. The tax credit is somewhat income limited. The applicability of the tax credit is somewhat income limited in the sense that the purchaser of the EV has to meet, has to be, if you're a joint filer with a adjusted gross income of $300,000 or less, or if you're a single filer, adjusted AGI of $150,000 or less. Even with these income limitations, though, it is estimated by at least one estimate that I saw that the tax credits are going to be available to approximately 91% of all potential buyers. The tax credits are also somewhat price limited as to the cost of the car, so that the tax credits are available only for cars that cost $55,000 or less, EV cars that cost $55,000 or less, or EV pickup trucks, vans, and SUVs that cost $80,000 or less. Don't quote me on this, but as I understand it, under current prices, these price caps might take the Rivian truck, for example, out of the picture. It would definitely take the higher end Teslas out of the picture and other high-end EV cars. But for the most of the EVs that I think that are out there, these price caps, the EVs will qualify under these price caps. Now, again, this is a tax credit for the purchase of new or used EVs. Obviously, to take advantage of the tax credit, one has to have tax liability. If one doesn't have federal income tax liability because of your income level, starting in 2024, and even for those that do have tax liability, starting in 2024, the $7,500 or $4,000 credit, as it may be, the consumer will be able to transfer that tax credit to the dealer, the car dealer, at the point of sale. How that's going to happen remains to be seen. IRS and Treasury are still writing the regulations on that, but it is intended to be able to allow those with no or zero tax liability, or anybody with tax liability even, to be able to transfer the benefit of that tax liability to the dealer. Now, will the consumer get the full value of the $7,500 tax credit, for example? It depends on the price negotiated with the dealer, I suppose. But in any event, the intent, though, is that the tax credit should be transferred to the dealer, or at least to create that option anyway, starting in 2024. The important aspect of the IRA is that it revoked the prior existing unit per manufacturer cap. So there, was tax credits that were available for the purchase of certain EVs prior to the adoption of and enactment of the IRA, but the prior program had a car manufacturer cap available to each car manufacturer for the number of cars that could potentially qualify for the tax credit. So Tesla and GM, for example, were capped out. If you wanted to buy a Tesla a year ago, you would not qualify for any kind of a tax credit because Tesla had already sold too many cars and had already capped out under the prior existing cap for the availability of the tax credit. IRA has revoked that unit per manufacturing cap, so Tesla and GM and anybody else can sell as many cars as they can. That will, as long as the other requirements are met for income limitation and whatnot, as many cars as they can to qualify for that tax credit. Okay. Next, please. So another getting to be a well-known feature of the IRA are the EV car manufacturing requirements for the tax credit. Under the IRA, the EVs that are allowed to qualify the tax credit have to have their final assembly in North America, which is good for Tesla and GM, and for the Toyota, Hyundai, and some of the European car manufacturers. It's going to create some issues and some pressure on them to potentially ramp up their plans or re-ramp their plans to go to final assembly in North America. And we'll have to see how that works out. And starting in 2023, a portion of the final battery components have to be assembled in North America, 50% in 2023, rising 100% in 2029 and later, in order for half the tax credit to be taken. And also the critical minerals that are being used for the battery assembly must be sourced in the US or from a US free trade partner. 40% of that source must be in 2023 and 80% in 2027 and later. And that's required to be able to take the other half of the tax credit. Now, the IRA authors, I think, and well known, is the intent of these provisions is to lessen our dependence on China, which, depending on what you read, could be said to be the source of 3/4 of the critical minerals that are required for the assembly of the batteries. I'm just telling you what I've read. None of this is my original research on any of this, but that trying to get away from the IRA authors anyway are trying to get away from dependence on China for battery assembly and critical minerals for these batteries, and to bring it to North America and to the free trade partners in order to lessen our dependence on what is sometimes a volatile, relationship with China. So next, what we've talked about is homes and cars, and homes, office, and cars. I just want to say a few words about industrial scale renewable energy projects. IRA incentivizes industrial scale renewable energy projects by extending the production tax credits at their highest rate for solar and wind generation projects, and adds new PTCs, production tax credits, for clean hydrogen and nuclear power. It extends the 30% investment tax credit for solar wind projects, and adds battery storage projects to the kind of projects, the list of projects that qualify for the investment tax credit. And for these tax credits are available through 2032, and for solar projects in particular, the availability of these tax credits through 2032 is, so I've been read and so I've been told, is very significant, because heretofore these tax credits were, at least for solar anyway, were authorized only by Congress only on an annual basis. That kind of uncertainty in how these tax credits are authorized, can wreak havoc in the project for the project financing markets. And now there is some certainty that these tax credits are going to be available for at least another 10 years, and that's said, to do good things for these renewable projects that want to get established and want to get up and running. There's also a 30% tax credit for the expansion or establishment of manufacturing facilities for the production of renewable energy components. That would be wind-powered blades, wind turbine blades, solar panels, battery storage components, but again, to incentivize the manufacturing facilities to be able to ramp up and to meet what will hopefully be a great demand for renewable energy components that is anticipated by this IRA. And then finally here, and this really deserves a lot more discussion that we don't have time for, nor do I really have the expertise for, but there is a substantial new funding of the Department of Energy Loan Authority for new renewable energy projects and renewable energy R&D. For example, the IRA authorizes $250 billion with the B dollars in new loan authority to guarantee financing for what's called the energy infrastructure and reinvestment financing. The intent of which, one intent of which, of course, is to take a old or shuttered coal facility, for example, and turn it into a wind or solar farm or a battery manufacturing facility or something like that. Something with a renewable component. And this money, $250 billion in this case, is available for loan guarantees to be able to help finance that kind of a major project. And the loan authority for the Department of Energy has been around for a while. What IRA has done is to substantially increase with billions of dollars of the available loan authority. But in prior years, as I've read, the DOE loan authority, for example, was used by Tesla in its very early years when it was on very shaky financial ground, and the loan authority was able to help sustain Tesla through those early financially unstable years until Tesla was in a position where it could start generating some real revenues. So that's an example of the kind of thing that hopefully the loan authority will be doing for renewable energy at large. So that's a quick run through of homes, vehicles, and industrial scale renewable energy projects and loan authority for same. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Belle, who's going to talk about, oops, I'm not going to do that. Yes, I am going to do that. Sorry, thank you for doing that. I'm going to turn it over to Belle to talk about agriculture programs and social justice programs.
Thanks, Jim. So the The IRA provides substantial funding, agriculture, forestry, and rural development, but primarily conservation provisions are, I'm going to tell you about in the Inflation Reduction Act, and it includes investments to fund conservation of rural lands, support farmers, ranchers, and other landowners to reduce climate effects and disasters, work to reduce the effects of drought on rural lands, and provide financial relief for struggling agricultural operations. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a busy slide, but we figured it's for this, the IRA has allocated about $40 billion for agriculture, forestry, and rural development. Within that, half of it goes to, there are 4 voluntary conservation programs under the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NCRS. And if you look here, you see that half goes to these 4: Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, the Conservation Stewardess Program, which supports producers for farm conservation efforts, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and I'm going to show you something separate on that, and that supports new activities on the farm that improves soil, water, and air quality, and then the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And those are the 4 that are funded under the NCRS. And then there's the rural development, 14 billion, and then there's 4 billion for mitigating impacts of drought, and that to the Western reclamation states, and California is one of those. And then to the U.S. forestry is hazardous fuels reduction projects, which is 1.8 billion. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, one of these conservation programs, environmental quality, EQIP, I think it's called. Fascinating, it prioritizes the proposals that limit methane emissions from cattle, and also funds for conservation practices that directly improve soil carbon, reduce nitrogen losses, or reduce, capture, avoid, or sequester carbon dioxide, methane, or nitrous oxide emissions associated with agriculture production, and financial and technical assistance to agriculture producers. And then under the practices that are mentioned here, they address water and air quality, soil health, erosion, and other ground and surface water conservation. And the practices may include activities such as improving irrigation efficiency and restoring pasture lands. So this is an extraordinary infusion of funds into what has not normally been underfunded. Next slide, please. Okay, so another feature of the IRA is the support of what we'll call social justice. And the bill invests over $60 billion to support low-income communities of color that are disproportionately burdened by effects of climate change, grants for zero effects of climate change. And this is, I'll just give you some examples. I mean, as I say, overall 60 billion, which is incredible. And we have to give credit to the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform, is a coalition that has been a major voice in negotiating this bill. And then, for example, 3 billion to clean up ports, which are a big source of pollution in communities of color. Another 3 billion for community block grants to help environmental justice communities set their own priorities about what they want to do. And probably major is that there is a $27 billion allocation in the bill for Clean Energy Accelerator, which is really nonprofit green banks or technology accelerators. And of that, 55% is going toward environmental justice priorities. Thanks. Next slide. Okay, well, this I thought that the best way to inform you about how elaborate and interesting the environmental justice provisions are of this act is to show you a table that was produced and let you see for yourself. No, that's not.
Yeah, give me a break. This is an advanced PowerPoint that you're asking me to do here. So give me a second.
Yeah, well, I can mention that there are on this table, when we finally get to it, I'm going to
There we are. I found the table. Give me a second here.
Sure, okay, yeah. I'm glad it's going to be able to be put up. There we go. This is and this includes provisions to provide federal benefits to communities with environmental justice concerns. There are direct benefits and indirect benefits, and direct are greenish and indirect are slightly orange. And you can see why don't you scroll down, Jim? I mean, not Jim, Ken, yeah. And what I want to focus on, because Jim covered some of this, I want to focus on several things. One is rural access. Just keep scrolling down and we'll get to, there it is, rural access. Yeah, there's 9.7 billion to USDA financial assistance for rural electric cooperatives. That's very interesting. Another one is financing greenhouse gas and air pollution reductions. Keep going down. You'll see it keep going down. Wait. There we go.
There.
Yeah, right. And so this table will be made available to you. It really it helps understand the kinds of benefits that are available. And that's at 27 billion I mentioned, to enable low-income disadvantaged communities to deploy or benefit from zero emissions technologies and other greenhouse gas reduction activities. And then there's if you go down further, keep going down, there's there's let's see, block grants. We have 2.8 billion for block grants. And then at the bottom, they have redressing transportation systems. And that one amounts to about 1.9 billion. And it's interesting, competitive grants for what are called context sensitive projects that improve walkability, safety, and affordable transportation access, and grants for projects that serve these underserved, disadvantaged communities. Thank you. Okay.
Now, am I supposed to go back to the other one?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Well, now you got me.
Oh, that's too bad.
Okay, now I got it. You can't see that yet, but I've got it up anyway.
Yeah, Bill, are we on the challenges and vulnerabilities now? Were you done with your social justice?
Yeah, we're now on yours.
Okay, so while Ken is pulling that up, I mean, I can just get into it. You know, you're talking about the IRA and the challenges and vulnerabilities that, you know, we have to try to get to where we want to get to the IRA. As many of you know, there were compromises that were made in the passage of the IRA. 4 offshore oil and gas leases were effectively approved, 3 in the Gulf, 1 in Cook Inlet up in Alaska. And they were approved notwithstanding the fact that they were effectively stayed either by court order or by the Biden administration. But it's one of the things that they had to agree to. Go to around about 15 or 16, Ken. One more. Yeah, right there. So anyway, the approval of 4 offshore lease approvals. Another compromise was to the extent that the presidential administration, in this case Biden, wants to move ahead with renewable energy leases on federal lands such as wind or solar. There's also a requirement to offer to lease to the oil and gas industry leases as well. Now, that takes some bit of an explanation. For example, the Biden administration can offer to lease, really unattractive offshore oil tracts and meet this requirement in order to be able to move ahead with the offer of wind and solar leases elsewhere. On the other hand, a pro-oil president that comes in, who would be doing this anyway, can go ahead and offer more attractive offshore or onshore leases to the oil and gas industry in order to continue the renewable energy program on federal lands. So that remains to be seen as to how that particular provision will carry out. Another compromise, or at least viewed by some as a compromise, the carbon capture and sequestration credits, anywhere from $60 to $180 per ton of tax credits that are available for a CCS deployment, are made available to the fossil fuel industry, oil and gas and coal. That remains to be seen how that's going to be played out. But there are a number of things, a couple of things anyway, that the IRA has done with regard to the fossil fuel industry. One is to add new methane emission fees, significant fees starting in 2026 that are targeted solely at oil and gas, not at agriculture. And also the IRA raised rents and royalty fees for oil and gas leasing on federal lands. So one way to think about this is that the IRA has continued in some respects oil and gas development, but really at a cost. So compare the cost that is going to continue for the further oil and gas development with the massive subsidies and incentives and tax credits that are being made available by the IRA for further development, industrial scale and home improvements for renewable energy. And the hope is that the incentives are going to, matter of fact, NRDC, for example, has concluded that probably it's a 10-to-1 benefit, 10-to-1 benefit for renewable energy and greenhouse gas emissions as compared to the fact that there will be some continuation of oil and gas and coal emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. But anyway, that taken in totality, it's still the benefit far outweighs the cost, at least according to some people like NRDC. Now, one of the challenges for the implementation of the IRA is workforce development. We don't have enough qualified contractors out there, especially for installation of energy efficiency improvements to the home. Some people have called this the issue for the rapid deployment of energy efficiency improvements in the home. The IRA does authorize $200 million for workforce development, money that's going to be pushed out to the states so that the states can have some money to ramp up their workforce development so that contractors know what they're doing when they're installing a heat pump in your home, for example, and that there's enough contractors out there that know how to do that. But that's considered, at least in the near term anyway, a potential bottleneck in terms of trying to get to the outcome that we all desire with the IRA. Another huge consideration is energy infrastructure development. And some people have said that we need to double the pace of our US transmission line expansion in order to meet 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas reductions by 2030. So look at it this way, that in the one sense, the IRA is incentivizing all these industrial renewable energy projects, solar, wind, battery, et cetera, onshore and offshore, et cetera, and also incentivizing the demand for renewable energy and from the cars and the energy efficiency improvements in the home and so on. But we still need to improve on the connection between the generation and the consumer, the transmission lines, basically, and the interconnection agreements and whatnot. And that's all about, what somebody like Senator Manchin would call permit streamlining, for example. It's kind of a value-laden term, but there is a fair amount of bipartisan support, at least from what I've read anyway, in terms of trying to come up with a more efficient way to be able to authorize the deployment of these transmission lines that are going to be required in order to electrify America, and do so in a way that is respectful of, the people who don't want it in their backyard, and other people who don't want historical wetlands to be filled, and people who don't want this and that and the other thing, all of which are important and all of which have to be considered. But that's the kind of thing that is really something that we have to handle one way or the other if we're going to get to our greenhouse gas reduction objectives. So I'm going to stop there. And Belle, you want to few concluding remarks?
Yeah.
There's one more slide, Ken. Sorry. Or, yeah,
Oops, sorry about that.
the next slide here.
That is not it. Yeah. That's
There you
it. Yeah. Okay, so we decided to move this to the end, even though we could have put it in the beginning, because this is the kind of the heart of it. And overall, according to modeling that has been done by very reputable economists and others, the IRA cuts US greenhouse gas emissions on the order of about 900 million tons by 2030. And if you think about it, it represents globally the US national determined contribution. That's a term that's used that's used by the Paris people, our pledge to the world to cut our greenhouse gas emissions down to half of peak levels. And then you add another 100 million tons of reduction by 2030 from carbon storage and sequestration in national forests and agricultural land. So that gets you to the billion. And that really gets us to about 38 or 48% emissions below 2005 levels, and are a couple percent. And to get to the 50%, which is the administration's goal, the US goal, below 2005 levels by 2030, which we call a chance to close the gap, that will require action from states, local governments, corporate and institutional leaders, and individual action. And there's a certain amount of assessment of that and thought to be quite feasible. So thank you very much. We were going to have one final slide on what happens if you have a change in administration and a change in Congress, but we decided to leave that to questions. Thanks a lot. Questions?
Hi, it's Corey from Sarahville. I have a question. Thanks a lot for that. That was fantastic. I was screen capturing like crazy. So I guess one of the questions is, everybody worries about what's going to happen if Republicans take over in the House and Senate. And is there much vulnerability to this going forward? I mean, a lot of this is sort of longer term. Things don't even get into place. A lot of this is going to benefit communities and states that tend to be more red. And
That's
there
right.
hasn't been, anyway, I'm just wondering, is there any consideration around vulnerabilities about losing some of these provisions or getting reversed at all?
Well, what impresses me in this evaluation is that this bill is different from other climate bills that we've seen, which generally have kind of a price or a cap and trade system or a climate policy. This, as someone says, this has 50 targets, which are very difficult to undermine by any administration, especially when the costs and benefits go back and forth between red and blue and go to everybody, and they are building support. As you can see, this is jobs, this is investment. And so we haven't seen it before. So it's thought to be that it is less vulnerable, in fact, not very vulnerable to those changes.
Yeah, let me just add that probably the most important part, according to things that I've read anyway, and the things that make sense to me, of the IRA are the tax credits. Tax credits for installation of new renewable energy, efficient energy, and solar panels, and industrial energy, renewable energy projects, and so on. And so that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for the climate change buck, is in the tax credits. So if Congress were to come along and reverse those tax credits, and if that were to be approved by the sitting president, that would be a problem. But that's that, as Bella was saying, there's too many people that are invested, both from industry and from the consumer side, that it's thought that is hopefully somewhat unlikely. The money, the grants, the rebates,
Huge.
God knows who, what red states, some red states, or some people in some red states might try to do with that, not take the money, out of spite. I mean, we even know that happened in California, in a couple of cities who didn't take COVID money because they didn't want to be associated with the COVID relief funds coming out of DC. So there is always that possibility, but it's so the grants and the rebates, especially in the red states, we'll have to see how that works out. But the tax credits, that's really the heart, I think, of what is driving the benefits, the climate control benefits of the IRA. And that's going to stay unless Congress and the president both agree to repeal them. And I don't know how likely that will be, even under a Republican administration.
It's all going to start right away, by the way, 2023, 24, and then it goes on for maybe 10 years. And so people will begin to see one of the issues, the protectionism side of it, the fact that made in America kind of grates some of us, not the way you're supposed to do it. But on the other hand, it looks like it's going to build considerable support in the areas that would be most vulnerable to what you're saying. Bill?
Yeah, thanks a lot for this. It's really helpful to see this all laid out. And it strikes me that there's yet more to do. There's a task here of really taking this great comprehensive national effort and funding source and really translating it down to what it means here in Marin, and particularly on a policy level, on both a funding and a policy level. I mean, right now, as we'll talk about, I think a bit later, we have pending, potentially huge policy changes, improvements on electrification of buildings, and included in that package are, significant support for EV infrastructure as well. And yet we're hearing that, in a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of the 12 jurisdictions, there are roadblocks being thrown up, and a lot of those are around money and concern about, impacts on affordable housing, impacts on individual residents, et cetera. And it strikes me that many of those issues are solved by this funding. And I think making those connections clear to the 12 councils and the Board of Supervisors at this point in time is really critical to moving forward at that particular policy. And that's just one example. I think the focusing on affordable housing for a moment, the social justice, a third of this bill seems to be social justice, environmental justice oriented. Well, why can't that be a source directly of funding for any gap that a new affordable housing developer may face in electrifying its buildings, a new building, or indeed for rehabbing existing buildings. So I think making those very tangible connections and getting them in the hands and heads of our decision makers is really critical to capture this moment. It's a rare moment that we have this kind of resources coming forward and that we've identified the solutions we need to apply here locally. So let's capture that. And I would invite, you guys further involvement, maybe with Marin Can, to really lay out a roadmap here of how to make the best of this opportunity.
Great, Bill. Let's see. Annika, I just want to ask Annika if she wanted to add anything to what we commented on vehicles. I know you've been deeply into this for a while. I don't know if she's still here.
Yeah, I think we may have lost her. Oh, no, there she is. Yeah.
But she's there, but she's on mute, or maybe not in front of her computer.
Okay.
All right, well, let's come back to Annika in a minute. Are there other questions?
Yeah. Wow.
At the beginning of this presentation, I said just a couple of things about the speakers. I should say a little bit more to acknowledge the work that you've done, Jim. You were the general counsel for the California Natural Resources Agency in the mid-90s. And you were a 20-year partner at the law firm of Allen Matkins. And among your experiences, you were a former member of the BCDC, ex officio member, as you mentioned, of the California Coastal Commission, and a former member of the State Coastal Conservancy. So, sorry I didn't mention that at the beginning.
There'll be a quiz later.
Yeah, and what I didn't say about Belle is that I did say that she had been director of research and public policy for the UC system. What I did not say is that she's a member of the Marine Conservation League Board of Directors and a leader of Organizing for Action Marin, a co-leader of Lead on Climate, and she helped form, and was key really to forming the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership, which has developed model vegetation management practices for Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, and has won funding for a Marin biomass project. So kudos to you, Belle. So if there are no more questions, we should move on to the second part of the presentations on legislation. And Roger.
Hi, I'm sorry I joined late. So I didn't catch all of the presentation, but it was very clear and very well done. I appreciate it. I appreciate Bill's comments about getting the local jurisdictions here and the county working together, because it strikes me that reaching these kind of targets, certainly within 2030, will take an enormous amount of effort organizationally and people and so forth. So my question is going beyond the Marin North Bay. Do you have a sense, maybe this is Jim, as to how the state is approaching implementation so that not only Marin, and this group certainly has the capability to do a lot of work on this area, but all the counties and the state collectively are mobilizing to take full advantage of these opportunities, because as mentioned by Bell, it's really a quite an impressive array of opportunities. But unless effort is initiated immediately on a very detailed level, those opportunities will slip away. So I'm just curious how the state is approaching this.
Yeah, I would definitely agree about the need to jump now to grab the opportunities. And let me answer the question two ways. One, it's a perfect segue to Ken and what Ken is going to be talking about, the state programs. But with regard to the IRA and the money that's going to be made available to the states, including the state of California, I haven't talked to anybody at the state. I have talked to some, or at least I've had some email communications with Marin County, and also from generally what I've seen on the net in general, it's an unknown right now exactly how it's going to play out. I mean, counties waiting for direction from the state's waiting for direction from the feds. The feds are, working hard feds being the Department of Energy, are working hard to try to figure out, how to get this money out to the states as quickly as possible. But I'm afraid that other than, a intent to get it out and intent to use it, the details for this 2-month-old law are still very much in development.
I'll just say one thing, Roger, which the state is working its tail off on this one. Whether it's energy or resources or there are about 3 or 4 different agencies that are very busy on this right now. So, and then we're going to talk in a minute or two about the state's direction, and it doesn't tie necessarily to the IRA, but you'll see the connections.
So Wendy, you have a question.
Yeah, it's a question, more of a suggestion. It seems that what's really important for us to do locally is to set up a program to help people navigate all these different programs, how they can get the tax credits. I think this could be a perfect opportunity for Marin Can, looking at you, Bill, to set something up where, a place where people can go and find out what credits they can get, how they get the credits, especially helping low-income people or non-English people, fill out the forms. So that's my suggestion.
Good one.
Okay, so let's make the switch to talking about the climate change related bills that Governor Newsom signed, and the presenters on this going to be Ken and Bell. And Ken, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Say something about your work.
Okay, well, just for those who don't know me, I live in Greenbrae. I am a retired lawyer, although I am on the American Arbitration Association arbitrator panel for complex construction disputes still, but practiced for 40 years in the Bay Area, and sometime and worked with the legislature back in college. So I developed a little bit of expertise in how to read bills and understand how they work and the like. But most of my information on what we're talking about today is sort of self-generated since I retired. So anyway, that's and I'm also active in the Marin Sonoma Building Electrification Squad for the Climate Reality Project. So with that, maybe we'll launch in. See if I can share screen again. That didn't quite work. Let's see here. Okay, is my screen being shared?
Yeah, you just need to. That's
Okay.
excellent.
All right. So what we're going to talk about is sort of 3 things. One, what's been happening at the governor's level in terms of Governor Newsom's planning, state budgeting, what the California Air Resources Board has been doing this year, because they are doing some big things, and then a number of the most important bills that the legislature passed. But what you're really going to, I think the only preface I would make before Bell has some comments on this is that we always want to think they should be doing more and moving faster. But the state of California did a lot of heavy lifting this year. And I think we ought to at least recognize and be aware of what they did, so as we look forward and continue to urge them to do more. So, Bell?
Yeah,
Oops, wait a minute, this one.
so could you, that's good, yeah. So there are these sweeping climate measures that happened in California this year. And one we'll call the California Climate Commitment of the governors. It's the budget, and it focuses on equity and economic opportunity, and that's complemented by over 20 legislative bills that were recently signed, and there are others before then. This quote we really like from the governor, which is, together with the legislature, California is taking the most aggressive action on climate our nation has ever seen. We're cleansing the air we breathe, holding the big polluters accountable, ushering in a new era for clean energy. That's climate action done the California way. And we're not only doubling down, we're just getting started. That's a good beginning to this rather huge investment. So Newsom, the governor, in its commitment over 2 decades, plans to, and these are carried out by bills, by the way. So 2 decades, create 4 million new jobs, cut air pollution by 60%, reduce state oil consumption by 91%, save California's $23 billion by avoiding damages of pollution, and reduce fossil fuel use in buildings by 94%, and protect Californians from extreme effects of climate change. And then here we are in the world, reducing reliance on fossil fuels and delivering clean, reliable, and affordable energy, and saving California money. And if you want to see all this laid out in more detail, you can access the statement itself. Ken?
Yeah. So, so that was Newsom's commitment that he made back in the spring, as far as what he was going to do. And, you know, okay, that was talk. So what actually has been put into the state budget that got enacted? And here's some of the specifics, first on energy and then on climate. The budget included, this year's budget included $8 billion to be spent over 4 years on out of the general fund on energy matters. The $1.2 billion to mitigate past due residential utility balances for people who were unable to pay their utility bills during the pandemic. $2.2 billion for strategic energy reserve resources where the grid is stressed. A lot of focus on reliability, because we know if the lights go out, the interest in transitioning to renewable energy among the general population is going to be stressed. There's money for new zero or low emission technology for distributed energy electricity backup, money for long duration storage incentives, and $970 million for residential solar and storage incentives, 2/3 of which are targeted towards low income. So good money there. In climate, a lot of money on transportation. There's about $20 billion on this page that was allocated to be spent over several years, but starting this year, and it's in this year's budget backed up by legislation. $1.5 billion to advance electric school buses, $600 million for zero emission vehicle trucks, buses, off-road equipment, $1.2 billion for active transportation programs, Money for high-speed rail and $8 billion for regional and local transit. That's important. Climate adaptation, $400 million for climate resiliency projects, and then big chunks of money for drought resilience and wildfire and forest resilience, complementing some of those things we saw in the Inflation Reduction Act. But these are specifically general fund allocations in from California's budget. The Air Resources Board, which is one of the 3 agencies most responsible, maybe 4 agencies, for implementing climate policy in the state of California. So as I think we all heard, they have issued a rule which mandates that that all sales of passenger cars and light duty trucks must be zero electric vehicles by 2035. And importantly, there are some interim standards in there. And I like this as a theme throughout a lot of what the agencies and the legislature is doing. Not only did they set goals out there for 2035 or 2040 or 2045, but they set some interim targets so that they can measure how we're doing, and they don't just try and back end load, make some promises and then find ourselves too far down the road to do anything about them. The Air Resources Board is currently considering a rule covering medium and heavy duty trucks. They need to get a waiver from EPA for that rule to go into effect under the same Clean Air Act rule that allows California to regulate passenger cars. This would require that certain fleets deploy zero electric vehicles starting in 2024 and end sales of internal combustion medium and heavy duty trucks in 2040. They've also proposed in the state implementation plan 100% of newly purchased furnaces and water heater sales be zero emissions starting in 2030. We'd all like to see that sooner, but at least they've set a sunset on the sale of new furnaces and water heater sales. Now, somewhat on the negative side, one of the key documents in the state enacts every few years is the scoping plan for emission reductions, which the Air Resources Board does. Their draft plan is currently out, and it relies too much on carbon capture and sequestration. I think about 30% of the reduction in overall emissions they're planning is supposedly going to come from that. And there has been a lot of pushback on that just is not, that's pie in the sky at this point in time and is not something that can be realized. And that they, hopefully they're in the process of revising their scoping plan to maybe beef up how they're getting emission reductions elsewhere, and reducing their reliance on carbon capture and sequestration. There's actually a workshop they're doing. I think it's on October 28th. If anybody's interested, you can go to the Air Resources Board website and log into the public workshop and find out what they're doing on that score.
I just want to mention Ken on this one. There's been a lot of involvement of the environmental community on this, and the Climate Center. I don't know if Kurt is here, but anyway, they've taken a strong position, and the governor has come out himself and asked the CARB to change its timetable and to meet these goals earlier rather than later. And so CARB has got pressure from the governor and from environmental groups, and imagine there'll be some modification.
Yeah, and MCL wrote an advocacy letter to the Air Resources Board, pointing out our criticisms of the draft scoping plan. So, new climate and energy legislation that passed this year. Over 40 bills were passed and signed into law this year, which is a pretty active. I know a lot of us were disappointed that 2021 didn't see much in the way of legislation on climate from California. Well, they made up for it at the end of the 2-year session by passing a lot of bills. The first one on carbon neutrality is important. We previously had an executive order from Governor Newsom, which mandated net zero no later than 2045. And now that's become, executive orders, as we've learned at the federal level, also at the state level, a new governor could rescind a executive order. Now this has been placed into law so that these mandates are law. State agencies have to be net zero by 2035. There was an important bill, SB 1137, to protect communities against oil drilling. It established setback distances of 3,200 feet between new oil wells and homes, schools, parks, or businesses. And it also mandated that existing oil wells within that distance from these same sort of sensitive things had to meet specific health and safety standards and environmental standards, which it wasn't clear that they were required to meet before. Carbon capture and storage or sequestration. We heard about that as one, and I know we've all were very concerned about that as a giveaway to Senator Manchin in the federal bill. So California came out with two bills on this. So the first one they did was they established a process for advancing carbon capture and storage technologies in California. But really what that says is there's an agency which is to look into what the science is and what processes might actually pan out, and more significantly study the geology of the state to see where there are places where CO2 could be stored underground under a fairly closely regulated process, so that we can find out, as this technology improves, if it does, where we can store it, and guidelines on how long it can, it has to be in a place which isn't going to be touched for more than 100 years after the last injection of carbon dioxide into it. And then, more importantly, both bills have specific language in them that prohibit the use of, prohibit injection of CO2, streams of CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. So as carbon capture and sequestration is, the technologies are rolled out or people come up with projects, a use for that carbon capture, CO2 capture cannot be for enhanced oil recovery. So that's good news.
That's really, Ken, I just want to say that is,
Yeah.
I think, one of the most impressive legislative accomplishments are those two bills, but especially the SB 905. And advise everybody interested in this to have a look at those.
Yeah, I'm sure that there was a lot of pushback from the oil industry on that, because they've seen, this is CCS is an excuse for producing more oil. AB 1757, nature-based solutions. This requires the state to develop achievable carbon removal targets for natural and working lands. So it set up a process for the Natural Resources Agency to start developing detailed metrics as to what actually is realistic and achievable in terms of enhancing carbon removal from natural and working lands. And I think also importantly, it mandates that those targets that are going to be created, and they need to be created starting January 1st, 2024, are going to have to be incorporated into the Air Resources Board scoping plan in its next iteration. So good targets, and then a place that they're going to get measured. Bill, you want to talk about SB 1020?
Let's see. The clean energy target.
Yeah, or I can, if not, I'll go on. So this was, I think, we've had this for the past couple of years, a clean energy target of being 100% clean by 2045 as far as what our grid is. So what this does, again, it's interim targets that they're working on. This establishes these targets at sooner dates. We'd all like them even sooner,
Yeah,
but it established a clean energy target of 90% by 2035 and 95% by 2040.
yeah,
This was a big, the Diablo Canyon reauthorization was a big climate and energy bill that passed at the tail end of the legislature. A lot of people are extremely unhappy on the extension of Diablo Canyon. But I wanted to point out some of the things in the bill that are actually a little better. That are things, effectively things that the legislature extracted in exchange for authorizing Diablo Canyon. First, the governor wanted the extension to last to 2035. The legislature only made it apply to 2030, and it's expressly conditioned on approval by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and funding by Department of Energy for a significant portion of the extension costs. The bill mandates that the California Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission are supposed to do reliability planning assessments on a quarterly basis. And they're actually, in that process, they created an off-ramp for stopping the reauthorization. So if the Public Utility Commission could confirm that new renewable energy and zero carbon resources are built and interconnected and adequate to substitute for the energy generated by Diablo Canyon, the CPUC could retire the plant earlier than 2030. The bill mandates that 100% of electricity sales in the state be from renewable sources by 2045. Somewhat unrelated to Diablo Canyon, but it's an extra mandate, and it makes it clear that you can't, by doing that, you can't increase GHG emissions in the Western grid outside of California. It established a $1.1 billion clean energy investment program to fund accelerated production of renewable resources. Let's see. It required the Energy Commission to establish load shifting goals, a little bit of an accelerated permitting process for transmission lines. So there's some other things in here to try and speed the move to renewables that hopefully, one last thing. It specifically made clear that the legislature was doing this for reliability purposes. So all of the load serving entities, including PG&E and Southern California Edison and our local CCA, MCE, and others, they specifically cannot include any power from Diablo Canyon in their planning for how much energy they need to procure. So this is clearly, Diablo Canyon is a reliability tool to make sure that the lights don't go out. So not a good bill overall, but some good parts to it that got grafted on. Some of the other new climate laws that got passed, there is AB 2075 mandates the development of charging standards in the next cycle of the building codes for multifamily dwellings, and also directed the CEC to publish guidelines for building electrification to make it simpler for people to understand. AB 1738, the Building Standards Commission is supposed to create standards for level 2 EV charging in existing multifamily buildings. SB 1382 has to do with the Clean Cars for All program, which was designed to reduce, to make it easier for low-income people to buy EVs. So this is a two-part bill, one to identify barriers in the program to see why it's not working better. It also exempts zero emission vehicle cars from sales tax for people eligible to buy their cars under the Clean Cars for All program.
This SB 1075 is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that one is interesting. That's from Senator Skinner from Berkeley. Trying to understand the prospects for hydrogen and green hydrogen, and it was signed. So we'll have to see how that goes. And then the AB 2278 biodiversity, and that requires a Natural Resources Agency to prioritize collaborative actions in working toward the 30 by 30 goal and the annual progress report, which is very interesting for those in the conservation world. Thank you.
Yeah. So those are just some of the bills, the 40 bills that passed. There are there's a bunch more, but anyway, that's an overview. So I think the takeaway is the legislature got busy in doing a number of things this year. It'll be interesting to see what they do next year. I think one of the things they're going to end up doing is, as Roger Peters' question sort of indicated, and Jim's response, we still don't have regs out of the federal government explaining exactly how the Inflation Reduction Act money is going to get passed out. And so I'm sure that as that becomes available, one of the things the legislature is going to do is try and figure out how to get a hold of that money. So
I just wanted to add one thing. I think the legislature really has done a fantastic job for the last few years. These bills don't just pop up in August of 2022. They've been working on these bills for years. And so they really have a reservoir of excellent work on this. And so the governor was able to tap into it rather than I think they both took the lead. I just want to give them credit because I think it's quite impressive.
Yeah. So any questions about any of these things? Jim?
Oh, I don't know anybody else. I've already had my time, but I do have a question. With the carbon CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, is there, and you may have covered this and I might have missed it, financial incentives at the state level for the development of CCS? Because in the Inflation Reduction Act, as I mentioned, even though it's available to the fossil fuel industry, the significant tax credits, $60 to $180 per ton of CCS, and not only that, but from the loan and R&D programs authorized by the IRA, the money that has to be authorized by DOE and get out to the state and so on. A lot of money available for CCS research and development, all of which, of course, can go to what CARB is talking about in terms of getting a significant portion of our California greenhouse gas emissions realized from CCS.
I'm not aware of any appropriations from the state to encourage CCS. Like I said, the legislation focuses on getting the Natural Resources Agency and the state geologic agent, the California Geological Survey, to establish the Geologic Carbon Sequestration Group to basically figure out where you could store carbon if it's captured.
I think it's more at the research stage than it is incentives.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, a couple of things. The sequestration part is really key, and I think could be a key focus for MCL in particular. And I'm thinking on the nature-based side of it.
Yeah.
I'm still really leery about pumping things way underground.
Yeah,
One of the comments we've gotten from the Marin Carbon Project from Jeff Creek is that, we've got good uses for this carbon in our natural systems and in our agricultural systems to keep it in nature-based circulation. So to look at sequestration from that standpoint, rather than, putting everything back into the ground. So that's important to look at. On the funding side, I just wanted to point out that Bell and I were at a meeting of the statewide biomass cohort of biomass projects, which includes the Marin Biomass Project as one of 5. And the head of the iBank in California, which is sort of the green bank statewide, was just kind of salivating over all this money coming out of the IRA funds. So they will be a major conduit, I think, for tapping some of those federal funds and making them available and packaging them through grants, et cetera, and loans to the development of infrastructure and some of the larger uses that they might be put to here in Marin. And Marin Carbon Project comes to mind as something that might stand in line, or the biomass, the infrastructure that may be required for that as well. So there's a lot of opportunities there, I think, again, from a local focus that we could tie into. And then just finally, I'm really excited by this 2030 end of the sale of new furnaces and water heaters that aren't zero emission, i.e. electric. And I think that again produces, sets a framework for our local decision makers to really be aware of. We need to start gearing up to reach that state goal, so we're not flat-footed 6-8 years from now.
Yeah.
right.
One other thing I might say on funding overall that doesn't exactly fit into this, but on the EV charging side of things, the CPUC does have a proposed decision out right now, which the CPUC has already said that we're going to include all costs associated with EV charging from our pole, that you need to get your system upgraded, for example, from the pole to your meter. That's already going to just be part of the general rate base for infrastructure. So that's not going to be the responsibility of the individual property owner. And they're now have got programs to look at how they can help support the costs of EV charging infrastructure from the meter to where it needs to be used on a property. And they've got one point, they confirmed that in addition to whatever money might be coming under the Infrastructure Act or the Inflation Reduction Act, that the CPUC has authorized the utilities to spend an additional $1.5 billion between now and 2025 on that, and just approved an additional $1 billion for the second period, 2025 to 2027. So that's another chunk of money coming for something to help move the ball forward on electrifying transportation.
I just noticed that Damon Conley is with us. And I don't know if he's available, but if he is, I'd like to know where how the Board of Supervisors is looking at this huge influx of funding for climate.
Well,
He's not there.
yeah, why don't we give him?
I just saw that and I thought we hadn't mentioned that level. We talked about the assembly. We haven't talked about the Board of Supervisors and where they are on this. But it's each level has got it work to do.
Kate?
Yeah, I kind of have been struggling on how to communicate this comment. I appreciate Bill and Wendy's comments about how to take all this information and make it put it together so that people understand how they could take advantage of the IRA. And also Jim's remarks and Bill's remarks about obstacles, local obstacles in terms of hardships for vulnerable small businesses, et cetera, that are working against the REACH code adoption by our cities, and also just locations of high voltage transmission lines near residents and wetlands. And what this all means to me is that not only I think it's our cities and our counties and our regional collaboration with others that implements our goals for the use of all of this legislation. And what's hard for me to grasp is a vision, our vision for the future on how all these bills work together to provide not only rapid decarbonization, but also, looking at how we provide housing opportunities and adaptation to climate change, the impacts of climate change, and still maintain a planet that supports an ecology that's a biodiversity that's quickly, populations of wildlife are quickly depleting. I think 69% was in the New York Times recently. So I just, I think it's really important that as local groups, we do try to envision how this all works together, and then work to influence our decision makers on how these policies and how this legislation and funding can promote our vision of our locales that can adopt all of a future where all of this can work together. I don't know if that was comprehensible or not.
Really good, Kate. Thanks. Really good.
Okay, so we should move on. Before we do, I want to let. Well, why don't we hear from Pam, and then I'll make my remarks. Pam?
Thanks. So if I could even take this to a very specific local situation to help me kind of understand things. Corey, if you're still here, you might be able to help me understand this, or the rest of us. So let's say the city of San Rafael moves forward on the way you presented last night. And so there's certain things that I'm not going to capture it very quickly, but so my understanding is, let's say it wasn't as good as I would have liked it, but there's room for things to change in the next year or two with the city on REACH codes. So let's then take Northgate Mall. If Northgate starts moving forward with, I call it the Northgate Town Square, with the housing we need and all the different things we need, will they be able to get away with not putting in as much EV infrastructure? In other words, when does their permit situation trigger the need to move forward on some of these really, really important improvements that they could have money for?
Yeah,
Right.
really good question. Thank you. I think if we get this over the hump this year, they will be required to do all that. And so I feel pretty confident about that. And the way that we've scoped the EV is the same that the county did, which basically says 100% of the parking spaces that you are assigning to people or that are built for the units, 85% of them need to be EV ready, meaning that there's actually a plug there, so that over time, as the demand increases, it's easy to just pop in a charger, and 15% need to actually have a charger installed. What we're trying to balance here is not having so many chargers installed. There's just so much optics right now around going by schools and seeing tons of chargers that are not being used. And those are going to go defunct and they're going to have to be replaced. And so we don't want that. On the other hand, we don't want them going in with no chargers installed, right? And so the compromise in the East Bay and South Bay Clean Energy CCAs really worked hard on this and developed this proposal, which we ended up adopting here, or which we're hoping to adopt here, and which the county just adopted, which was to say, well, let's make it ready then for 100% of the spaces. So that, you know, if people move in and there's only 2 chargers that need to be used, well, at least we've got, you know, adequacy for that. And we have reduced all the barriers to installing chargers later. If you just have EV capable and they got to pull new conduit and they got to do any kind of construction, it makes it just too many barriers. They're not going to do it. You know, when somebody comes in and says, hey, I got an EV, can we get a charger? It's just not going to happen. So this way, at least there's not only the conduit, but they've got the stub out and they've got a plug, and it's really easy to just get a charger and install it. So that's what we've done. And I think that maximizes the use or the ability for EV chargers currently when it gets developed, as well as into the future.
Including EAH?
It would include all, it includes affordable housing as well.
Okay, great. Okay, so before we move on, I want to tell people that we're going to be having a couple of presentations from MCE Clean Energy at the next Climate Action Working Group meeting. And I mention MCE because they're a big player in what happens locally around climate change. And I know at Marine Conservation League, we've been paying attention to what they're doing. One of their key missions is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They're a potential leader in pulling together different stakeholders to go after larger scale grant funding. So that's one reason why we're having this. We'll be having focusing on MCE next time. That's also one reason why we are really paying attention to MCE now. I will say a couple things on the administrative side. We're going to make the slides that were put out today available to folks very soon. The presentation part of this meeting will be put on our YouTube channel. We've been routinely putting on the presentations, uploading them to YouTube. We're going to send out some links to excellent podcasts on the Inflation Reduction Act, including some terrific interviews between Dave Roberts and Jesse Jenkins on the Volts podcast. And we'll also make available the letter that Marine Conservation League sent to CARB on its scoping plan. So with that, why don't we move to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on green building ordinances. And I think that's you, Ken, and Bill, and others.
Yeah, I wanted to report out on the Board of Supervisors hearing on Tuesday. So the REACH codes that we have heard about it here at MCL meetings, COG meetings in the past from Brian Reyes at the county, those went before the Board of Supervisors for a first reading. The second reading and final reading will be on at the supervisors meeting on November 15th. So make a note to dial into the Board of Supervisors meeting or attend in person. It was interesting being there in person, but a long time since I've been to one of those things in person. So that was kind of fun. So the Board of Supervisors had before it the 3 parts of the code. The new construction must be all electric with a couple of exceptions. for hardship and things of that and commercial kitchens. The second part of it was to require all residential upgrade renovations of greater than 750 square feet. And Corey, if I get this wrong, you can correct me on that. Any residential renovation of over 750 square feet is going to have a certain number of energy efficiency improvements, which could include heat pump, water heater, or space heater, but there are other options so people can have a choice as to what they want to do with their renovation in order to achieve a certain amount of energy efficiency, all based upon the table developed by the state with cost effectiveness guidelines. And then the third part of the REACH code was the EV standards that Corey referenced a minute ago, and with an additional standard that I believe new residential construction is going to have an EV, be EV ready as well. The good news was the Board of Supervisors received all of these REACH codes enthusiastically. All 5 members of the Board of Supervisors were very supportive of them, very supportive of the sustainability team's efforts to develop them and the outreach involved. And they look all set to unanimously vote to adopt these REACH codes on November 15th. And they talked about the next part of the project being to get these same codes enacted at the city and town level, hopefully so we can have uniformity for contractors and the like. So that's kind of my report on Marin County. Bill, do you have something to say about that Pam didn't already say about or Corey for that matter, about Sand or Fell the other night?
Yeah, I would like to ask Corey to maybe follow up on that, and also note that I think Fairfax is poised to adopt. Corte Madera, I think, is getting pretty close. I'm not sure, whether they're doing the whole package, but I assume those two are. We've heard rumors that Novato may be a more difficult task. So anybody here from Novato maybe could help step up to that, and we could figure out, are there ways of addressing concerns that council seems to have expressed in the past. But I would like to hear from Corey. My understanding from the CCAP discussion last night was that San Rafael is planning to go ahead with the new construction portion of the REACH code by the end of in November, with a workshop and then approval. But that the rehab portion would be deferred into next year. And Corey presented some rationale around that. But since he is here, I'd like to turn that to him to maybe explain why that why that portion is being separated out.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, you're right. We're moving forward with the new construction right now. And then we'll spend the first half of 2023 to build out what we think will be the most impactful and sellable remodel provisions in the first half of the year. And I think part of that is going to be, and this is one of the main reasons I was here today, to really kind of understand a little bit more the Inflation Reduction Act. I really need to put together that sort of, what does it really look like for folks? What are the incentives out there? And especially for multifamily rehabs is one of the main things. And we've asked the state for some data that they're just not able to get to this year because they're so busy working on all these REACH codes and getting all the cities in line that they just didn't have the time to do some of the remodel data analysis, and we don't have it. We have what we really want to know is, does this flex tool do much here? Or is that the best way to move forward? And so that's what we're going to want to take the first part of the year to work on. And then to the grand jury's report about putting together an electrification plan, I would say that the way that I'm looking at it is more as an implementation plan rather than a plan per se. And that's to say, you know, in our climate action plan, we were very conscious last time to call out that port policy ordinance alone doesn't do it. There's a lot of permit avoidance. The Marine Builders Association estimates anywhere between 40 and 80% permit avoidance. Now, if you have that kind of level of permit avoidance and you want to have a on burnout replacement policy, you have the potential of just driving more of it underground. So we want to be able to look at it holistically, and then also look at, again, this piece about when we were doing these engagements, which were fantastic, by the way. Brian did a great job. The county did a fantastic job of bringing in stakeholders from a variety of places. We found that so many people, so many contractors and developers didn't even know about a lot of these state programs and incentives and technical assistance. So we want to marry that as much as possible and make it so that you have to trip over that. By the time you get to the building counter, most of those decisions are made already. So we want to figure out, how do we get to people to really drive the change? And that's looking at it holistically. So that's what we're driving toward. And we should have that data from the state sometime in the beginning of the part of the new year. Does that answer your question, Bill? Does that give it a good enough explanation?
Yeah, I think so. It's, yeah, I think that there'll be another opportunity at the workshop also coming up to talk some more about that. I would like to pitch again, though, the importance of the appliance replacement, and that the electrification plan called for by the grand jury really, take that into close consideration. About a quarter of the grand jury's report, about 5 pages of a 20-page report, went into that subject. So there's a lot of thought out there to be, tapped into. And I think the opportunity now with the reach codes being before councils is also to plant that seed that, how do we get to 2030? How do we get there with by beginning replacement of appliances at this point in time? Because these things have life cycles that, go out 8-10 years, and a new furnace or a new water heater, and we're going to be stuck with anything that gets put in now for that amount of time. So getting it in place is really now or soon is really necessary to meet these 2030 goals or 2030 plus goals. So yeah, more to come, I guess, on that.
And Bill, just to emphasize again that the tax credits, the federal tax credits for installation of that kind of thing, begin in 2 months. So there's at least that. It's a carrot. It's not a stick, but it's a good carrot to have.
Yeah, and I think the trick here is melding the carrots with the framework that policy and ordinances can provide to really get people across the finish line here.
The only last thing I would just echo a comment that Bill made about Novato. What we're hearing is that Novato may well not even take up for consideration any of these reach codes in this year. And so we need more work in the other major city in Marin to get behind these.
Do you know what the major objections are?
No, I don't. I can't remember them. I've heard them from others, but I wouldn't repeat them from my vague memory at this point.
Okay.
I wonder if somebody could talk with maybe Eric Lucan, who I think is still on that council, right, for another month or so, couple of months, and see, because he should be a champion of this stuff. And I'm kind of surprised that, maybe his voice could be enlisted moving some of his fellow council members.
Susan, do you have an insight?
Yeah. From what I heard, the comment was that, or the thought with this, with the council was that the staff just does not have the time to work on it right now. They're short on staff and they've got to get their housing things done and they're way behind schedule on that. And they're feeling that they just don't have staff capacity to get into that until after the first of the year. But they are thinking about doing it the first of the year. And there is a council member who, or a council candidate who has strong environmental credentials that I think would be happy to pursue this if she gets selected. She's not in my district. I hate these districts that they've required us to adopt, but in the council. So I'll mute myself.
Okay, so it's 10:54. We're really out of time. And there were a number of other things that we were considering adding to the agenda. In addition to the reports, some discussion on Prop 30, but I don't think we have the time to do that justice. Are there any additional things that anybody wants to raise before we draw this to a close? Okay.
Well, I wanted to mention one thing is that Annika is here and I see her. And we had hoped that she would be able to say a little bit about quickly, because we don't have much time, about her efforts under the IRA to bring some sense to it to her group and to others.
Sure, I could just make a quick comment. And we are, we do weekly EV 101 and EV 102 presentations, and we have a whole slide on the IRA. We've been trying to interpret it. Some of the language is still vague, and we've read many articles, and unfortunately, it's like, we believe that these cars are available this year. We believe that most of the cars, most of the, are manufactured in the United States. We're really waiting to hear from manufacturers about the batteries and the critical minerals that go into the batteries, so that we can identify which cars will be able to access the federal tax credit as well. So, yeah.
Okay.
We're kind of waiting to hear, but we're staying up to date and presenting the latest information that we have as best as we can. While I have the floor for a moment, though, I will also say, with low inventory for EVs still an issue, Ride and Drive Clean is launching our very first e-bike discount campaign. So it's going to take place from November 1st through the 22nd. We're partnering with the New Wheel, and I sent out to many of you who are my partners some information about that. So hopefully you can promote that. Good discounts on e-bikes. We're really focused on getting people out of gas cars for their commutes and round the town errands with the e-bikes.
Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other announcements? So I want to thank Ken and Belle and Jim for all the work that they put into their presentation. Job well done, and it was helpful, and we'll see you folks next month at the next Climate Action Working Group meeting. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.